Hey everyone! Tonight we're embarking on an epic journey through one of history's most remarkable transformations. We're going to witness how a drunken village official became the founder of China's longest-lasting dynasty, how an empire rose from the ashes of tyranny to create a golden age that would define Chinese identity for millennia. This is the story of the Han Dynasty, for centuries of triumph, innovation, political intrigue, and ultimately, dramatic collapse. It's a tale that spans from 206 BCE to 220 CE, covering more ground and more time than the entire rise and fall of the Roman Empire. Think of it this way. If the Roman Empire was Europe's blueprint for civilization, the Han Dynasty was China's, except it lasted twice as long and governed 3 times as many people. Tonight, we'll explore not just the grand battles and political intrigue, but the daily reality of living through one of history's most remarkable transformations. So settle into something comfortable, and let's travel back to ancient China, where we'll witness the birth of political and cultural systems that make modern bureaucracy look simple by comparison. You open your eyes, and you're standing in a village tavern in 210 BCE. The air is thick with the smell of rice wine and unwashed bodies. Outside, you can hear the sound of horses galloping past, but something's wrong. These aren't the disciplined hoofbeats of imperial messengers. These sound urgent, panicked, like riders fleeing from something terrible. Welcome to the collapse of the world's first superpower. You wake up on a straw mat in what was, until recently, the mighty Qin Empire. But mighty is past tense now, because what you're experiencing is the complete implosion of the world's first centralized superpower. Think of it as if the United States, China, and the European Union all collapsed simultaneously while you were trying to get a cup of coffee. The smell hits you first, smoke from burning granaries mixing with the metallic scent of fierce sweat from the people crowding into your village. The first emperor, that's what Qin Shi Huang called himself, and yes, it was as arrogant as it sounds, died last year, and his empire is disintegrating faster than a sandcastle in a tsunami. You stumble outside, and the scene is apocalyptic. The roads are choked with refugees, dragging whatever belongings they could carry. Their faces are gaunt, eyes wide with the kind of fear that comes from knowing the roof over your head last night might be the last safe place you'll ever see. Your breakfast this morning consists of whatever grain you managed to hide from the 3 different tax collectors who showed up last week, each claiming to represent the true imperial authority. It tastes like survival and uncertainty, seasoned with the distant sound of armies that may or may not be fighting for your protection. The roads that once carried imperial messengers with their standardized bronze tokens, think ancient China's version of official government ID, now carry refugees with everything they own strapped to their backs. These aren't tourists. These are people fleeing from something that was supposed to protect them. As you stand in the middle of this chaos, you can't help but wonder, who could possibly have the vision and strength to put the pieces back together? You don't know it yet, but somewhere in this collapsing world, a middle-aged peasant named Liu Bang is asking himself the exact same question. And unlike most people, he thinks he might have an answer. You are Liu Bang, and you're what the Chinese politely call a man of the people, which in 209 BC means you're basically a middle-aged guy who drinks too much and hasn't paid back money you borrowed 3 years ago. You're 48 years old, which by ancient Chinese standards makes you practically retirement age, and your biggest claim to fame is being a village constable, think part-time sheriff in a town where the biggest crime is usually stolen chickens. Your hands smell like the rough hemp rope you use to tie up the occasional troublemaker, mixed with rice wine from last night's important village business meeting, also known as getting drunk with your friends. Your clothes are the kind of rough cotton that scratches against your skin and reminds you every day that you're not nobility, not even close. But here's what makes you different from every other middle-aged disappointment in rural China. You understand people. You know how to make a farmer laugh after a bad harvest, how to convince a merchant that paying his taxes is actually in his best interest, and most importantly, how to make people believe that following you might be the smartest decision they'll ever make. When a massive rebellion erupts, you're supposed to escort a group of convict laborers to a construction project. But the rains delay your journey, and under Qin law, which was about as forgiving as a tax audit. Arriving late means execution for everyone involved. You faced the same choice that started the rebellion: die for being late or die for rebelling. Unlike other rebel leaders driven by desperation, you see opportunity. You gather your men and give them a speech that would make modern campaign managers weep with envy. Brothers, we're all dead men anyway, but we can choose how we die. We can die as criminals, or we can die as rebels fighting for something better. Your convict laborers become your first soldiers. The local magistrate becomes your first enemy, and Pei County becomes your first conquest. What happens next reveals your genius. While other rebel leaders are proclaiming themselves kings and demanding tribute, you do something completely different. You open the treasury and distribute the wealth to anyone who joins you. You don't hoard power, you share it. You don't demand obedience, you earn it. Your army grows not because you're the best general, but because you're the kind of leader people actually want to follow. It's populism in its purest form, and in a world torn apart by aristocratic warfare, it's revolutionary. Imagine a boxing match between a philosophy professor and a professional wrestler, except the ring is the size of modern-day China, and the winner gets to rule a quarter of the world's population. That's essentially what you're about to witness. In one corner, Xiang Yu, 24 years old, built like a Greek statue come to life, and capable of single-handedly killing hundreds of enemy soldiers while probably looking good doing it. He's everything a warrior king should be: noble bloodline stretching back generations, personal courage that borders on insanity, and the kind of military genius that makes Sun Tzu look like he's playing checkers. In the other corner, Liu Bang, pushing 50, average height, common birth, and whose greatest military achievement so far is convincing people not to fight him in the first place. If this were a Hollywood movie, Xiang Yu would be played by someone like The Rock. Liu Bang would be played by, well, probably Danny DeVito. The contrast couldn't be more stark. Xiang Yu represents everything the old world values: aristocratic bloodline, personal courage, military genius, and an absolute commitment to honor above all else. When he enters a battle, he literally leads from the front, swinging his massive halberd, think medieval bat leaks on steroids, and inspiring his troops through sheer physical dominance. Liu Bang represents something entirely new. He's pragmatic, where Xiang Yu is idealistic. He's collaborative, where Xiang Yu is autocratic. Most importantly, he understands that winning wars is about more than winning battles. The first major clash comes at what historians call the Hongmen Banquet in 206 BCE. Xiang Yu, now the dominant rebel leader, invites Liu Bang to a feast. Everyone knows it's a trap. Liu Bang goes anyway. What happens next perfectly illustrates the difference between these two men. Xiang Yu, despite having every advantage and clear justification for eliminating his rival, can't bring himself to order Liu Bang's death during the feast. It would violate the rules of hospitality, a bigger deal in ancient China than violating someone's Wi-Fi password today. Liu Bang spends the entire evening being charming, deferential, and utterly non-threatening. He compliments Xiang Yu's achievements, acknowledges his superiority, and generally acts like a loyal subordinate who poses no danger to anyone. Then he excuses himself to use the bathroom and escapes. What follows is 4 years of the most strategically fascinating warfare in Chinese history. Xiang Yu wins nearly every battle, but Liu Bang wins the war. While Xiang Yu is focused on glorious victories and personal honor, Liu Bang is building a coalition. He recruits Xiang Yu's enemies, forgives Xiang Yu's former allies when they defect, and captures territory that he actually governs instead of just looting. The final confrontation comes in 202 BCE. Xiang Yu, surrounded and outnumbered, makes one last desperate charge. According to legend, he kills hundreds of enemy soldiers single-handedly before finally being cornered at a river. Even then, he refuses to surrender. "Heaven is destroying me," he declares, then draws a sword and kills himself rather than face capture. Liu Bang, when he hears the news, reportedly weeps for his fallen rival. The age of warrior kings has ended. The age of pragmatic politicians has begun. And Liu Bang, the middle-aged ex-constable who everyone underestimated, has just become the most powerful man in the world. You are Liu Bang, and it's 202 BCE. You've just won the most consequential war in Chinese history, but winning a war and ruling an empire are completely different skill sets. You're standing in what used to be Xiangyu's capital, surrounded by the wreckage of the old order, and you have to figure out how to govern more territory than any human being has ever controlled. The smart thing would be to copy the Qin system, right? After all, it conquered the world. But you've seen what happened to the Qin dynasty. It collapsed faster than a house of cards in a tornado. The Qin system was brilliant at conquest, but terrible at governance. It was so harsh, so inflexible, that it created enemies faster than it could eliminate them. Your first insight is brilliant in its simplicity. The Qin dynasty failed because it tried to change everything at once. It abolished the old kingdoms, eliminated the old nobility, and imposed a completely new system on people who had lived under feudalism for centuries. The result was constant rebellion. You take a different approach. Instead of destroying the old system entirely, you modify it. You create a hybrid system that combines the best of both worlds. In areas closest to your capital, you impose direct imperial administration, basically professional civil servants running local government. But in outer regions, you allow some of your most trusted generals and relatives to rule as kings. It's politically genius. The local rulers get to keep their dignity and traditional authority, but they're clearly subordinate to you. They can't issue their own currency, conduct foreign policy, or maintain large armies. Most importantly, their kingdoms will eventually revert to direct imperial control when they die. You're essentially buying time and loyalty while slowly centralizing power. It's the political equivalent of boiling a frog. By the time anyone realizes what's happening, it's too late to resist. But you don't stop there. The Qin system promoted people based purely on legal compliance and military achievement. This created a government full of bureaucrats who were technically competent but completely unable to think creatively. When crises arose, they could only respond with more laws and harsher punishments. You decide to value different qualities. Yes, you want competence, but you also want loyalty, flexibility, and the ability to understand people. You promote officials who demonstrate practical wisdom, not just rule following. Your approach to the economy is equally pragmatic. The Qin dynasty had tried to control every aspect of economic life, imposing heavy taxes to fund massive construction projects. You lighten the tax burden immediately. People who aren't constantly struggling to survive are less likely to rebel. But your most important innovation is cultural. The Qin dynasty had tried to create unity through force, burning books and executing scholars. You choose a different path. You're going to create unity through shared identity and mutual benefit. By the time you die in 195 BCE, you've created something unprecedented, a unified empire that actually feels sustainable. Your system isn't perfect, but you've built something flexible enough to adapt and strong enough to endure. Picture this. You are Empress Lü, and it's 195 BCE. Your husband, the great Liu Bang, founder of the Han Dynasty, has just died. The court is in mourning, the empire is uncertain, and everyone is watching to see what happens next. What they don't realize is that you've been preparing for this moment for years. You're not just any widow. You've spent decades learning the brutal realities of imperial politics. You've watched your husband navigate civil wars, rebellions, and palace intrigue. Now that force of personality is gone, and the empire is yours to protect. But here's the catch. In Han China, women don't become emperors. So you're going to have to rule through your teenage son while somehow maintaining control over generals who commanded armies and ministers who ran the government. Your solution is characteristically direct. You're going to make yourself so indispensable that no one dares to oppose you. Your first challenge comes immediately. Several of Liu Bang's old generals, now regional kings, seem to think that with the founder dead, they can renegotiate their relationship with the central government. They're testing the new regime, probing for weakness. They pick the wrong widow to mess with. You respond with surgical precision. When the king of Yen rebels, you don't just defeat his army. You hunt him down personally and execute him in the most public way possible. When other kings hesitate to send their required tribute, you remind them that the imperial army is still very much functional. But you're too smart to rely purely on fear. You begin systematically promoting your own family members to key positions, not just because of nepotism, but because family loyalty is more reliable than political promises. You're creating a power network that answers to you personally rather than to abstract imperial authority. Your handling of the court is masterful. You maintain the fiction that your son is the real emperor, while making it clear that all important decisions go through you. Ministers learn to present policy proposals to you first, knowing that imperial approval is meaningless without your consent. When your son dies young in 188 BCE, you face your greatest challenge yet. With no obvious heir, you could face a succession crisis that might tear the empire apart. Instead, you install a series of child emperors from collateral family lines while continuing to rule as regent. Your reign lasts until 180 BCE, when you die of natural causes. You ruled the Han Empire for 15 years through puppet emperors and shadow authority, and you've kept it stable, prosperous, and unified. History will remember you as one of the most effective rulers in Chinese history, even though you never officially held the title of emperor. Not bad for a woman operating in a system designed to exclude women from power entirely. Picture this. You are Emperor Wu of Han, and it's 140 BCE. You've inherited an empire that's been running on practical but harsh policies for over 60 years. Your predecessors believed in governing through strict laws and material incentives. It worked. China is unified, prosperous, and militarily powerful. But you're facing a problem that raw administrative efficiency can't solve. How do you create lasting legitimacy for an empire built on the ruins of everything that came before? Your advisors are split. The old guard wants to stick with what works. But there's a new voice in the court, a scholar named Dong Zhongshu, and he's proposing something radical. Abandon the practical atheism of your current system and embrace the moral philosophy of Confucius. This isn't just about changing textbooks. This is about fundamentally redefining what the Chinese empire represents. For the past century, Confucianism has been political poison. The first emperor burned Confucian books and buried Confucian scholars alive because their ideas about moral leadership and limited government directly threatened autocratic rule. Your own ancestors viewed Confucian scholars as naive idealists who would rather lecture about virtue than actually govern. But Dong Zhongshu isn't proposing the same old Confucianism. He's offering you something new, a version of Confucian thought that doesn't limit imperial power, but legitimizes it. Here's his revolutionary pitch. The emperor isn't just a political leader. He's the son of heaven, divinely appointed to maintain harmony between the celestial and earthly realms. When the emperor governs with virtue, heaven blesses the empire with prosperity. When he fails, heaven sends warnings through natural disasters. It's brilliant political theology. Instead of constraining your power, this new Confucianism makes you cosmically essential. You're not just ruling by force, you're maintaining the balance of the universe. But there's more. Dong Zhongshu proposes creating a scholar-bureaucrat class trained in Confucian classics. These wouldn't be the independent-minded intellectuals that terrified the first emperor. These would be imperial civil servants whose entire worldview revolves around service to the throne. You establish the Imperial Academy, essentially the world's first national university, where thousands of students study Confucian texts at government expense. These graduates become the core of your administration, spreading a unified intellectual culture throughout the empire. The transformation is remarkable. Within a generation, the brutal efficiency of your legal system is wrapped in the moral language of Confucianism. Officials still enforce laws and collect taxes, but now they do it while quoting classical texts about benevolent government and moral leadership. By the end of your reign, China doesn't just have a government. It has a state religion based on scholarship, hierarchy, and the divine right of imperial rule. Confucius, who died believing his ideas had failed, has posthumously conquered the Chinese Empire. You are Emperor Wu, and it's 130 BCE. You've been on the throne for 10 years, and you're starting to feel confined, not by palace walls or court ceremony, but by the very success of your predecessors. They built a stable, prosperous, defensible empire. But stability isn't enough for you. You want something that no Chinese ruler has ever achieved. An empire that dominates not just China, but the known world. Your court thinks you're getting ahead of yourself. The old ministers constantly remind you of the empire's limitations. Yes, China is unified. Yes, it's prosperous, but it's also surrounded by threats. The nomadic tribes to the north, think Mongols before the Mongols, raid your borders at will. The southern kingdoms remain only nominally tributary. But you have a different vision. You look at the world map and you see opportunity everywhere. Why should Chinese influence stop at the Great Wall? Why should other kingdoms be allowed to exist independently when they could be paying tribute to the Son of Heaven? Your first target is obvious: the northern nomads. For over a century, these mobile confederations have been the biggest threat to Chinese security. They're militarily sophisticated and completely unimpressed by Chinese claims to cosmic authority. They raid Han territory, demand tribute, and generally treat the Chinese Empire like a convenient ATM. This stops now. You begin what will become the most aggressive military expansion in Chinese history. Your military reforms are revolutionary. Previous Han armies were primarily infantry forces designed for defense. You create the world's first professional cavalry units, trained specifically to fight the nomads on their own terms. But your most innovative strategy is economic warfare. Instead of just fighting the nomads, you systematically undermine their economy. You cut off trade routes, support rival groups, and use Chinese wealth to buy off their allies. It's empire building through capitalism as much as conquest. The results are spectacular. By 120 BCE, your armies have pushed the nomads back hundreds of miles from the Chinese frontier. You've established Han control over valuable trade routes and demonstrated that Chinese military power can project across vast distances. But the northern campaigns are just the beginning. You simultaneously launch expeditions to the south, conquering kingdoms and extending Han control to what is now Vietnam. Chinese armies cross mountains into Korea, establishing provinces that will last for centuries. Your generals aren't just winning battles. They're reshaping the geopolitical map of East Asia. Territories that had been independent for centuries are now Han provinces. You are Zhang Qian, and it's 138 BCE. Emperor Wu has just given you what might be the most impossible mission in human history. Travel west into completely unknown territory, make contact with mysterious kingdoms that may or may not exist, and somehow convince them to join China in an alliance against the northern nomads. You're not exactly an obvious choice for this job. You're a court official, not an explorer. You've never been more than a few hundred miles from the Chinese heartland. And you're about to embark on a journey that will take you thousands of miles into territories where no Chinese person has ever returned alive. Your first challenge is getting there alive. The route west leads directly through nomad territory, and they have zero interest in letting Chinese diplomats pass through unmolested. Within months of leaving the capital, you and your entire expedition, over 100 men, are captured. What happens next would make for an incredible survival story. Instead of being executed immediately, you're held as a prisoner for over 10 years. 10 years. You learn the nomad language, understand their military tactics, and most importantly, you discover that there are indeed kingdoms beyond their territory. When you finally escape in 126 BCE, you continue westward. What you find changes everything. You reach the kingdom of Dayuan in what's now Uzbekistan and discover a civilization that's heard of China but never traded with it. They have horses, magnificent, powerful horses that make Chinese cavalry look like children riding ponies. They have grapes, alfalfa, and other crops unknown in China. Most importantly, they have gold and they want Chinese goods. But the real revelation comes when you travel further and discover something that revolutionizes your understanding of the world. These kingdoms already trade with other distant civilizations. There are established trade routes connecting Central Asia to Persia, to India, and even to places called Syria and Egypt that you've never heard of. You've just discovered that China isn't alone in the world. There's an entire network of civilizations out there, all trading with each other, all wealthy beyond Chinese imagination. When you return to Emperor Wu in 125 BCE, 13 years after you left, you don't just bring back intelligence about potential allies. You bring back proof that China is sitting on the edge of a global economy it never knew existed. Your report to the emperor is like something out of science fiction to Chinese ears. You describe kingdoms with tens of thousands of horses, cities built of stone, people who wear silk but produce different kinds of luxury goods, and most mind-blowing of all, a trade network that connects the entire known world. Emperor Wu's response is characteristically aggressive. If there's a global economy out there, China is going to dominate it. Within years, Chinese armies are marching west, not just to fight the nomads, but to establish Chinese control over the trade routes you discovered. Chinese merchants are following the armies, carrying silk, tea, and other Chinese goods to markets that have never seen them before. You've accidentally created what historians will call the Silk Road, not a single road, but a network of trade routes connecting east and west that will shape global commerce for over 1,000 years. You wake up before dawn in a Han Dynasty city, and the first thing that hits you isn't the sight of your modest courtyard house, but the sound, a symphony of civilization that would be completely alien to most people in the ancient world. You could hear the rhythmic hammering of blacksmiths already at work, the creaking of wooden cart wheels on stone-paved streets, and most remarkably, the sound of children reciting lessons from what might be the world's first public education system. The smell that greets you as you step outside is equally complex. There's the familiar scent of wood smoke from cooking fires, mixed with something more sophisticated, the aroma of steamed dumplings, fermented bean paste, and tea brewing in ceramic pots. These aren't luxury items available only to the wealthy. They're part of the daily diet of ordinary citizens in what might be history's first true consumer society. Your breakfast consists of rice porridge, pickled vegetables, and possibly some dried fish foods that represent a level of agricultural sophistication and trade networks that won't be matched in Europe for another 1,000 years. The chopsticks you eat with aren't just utensils. They're symbols of a culture that values precision and the kind of manual dexterity that comes from a civilization that's been refining its tools for centuries. Touch the silk robe you're wearing not because you're wealthy, but because Han Dynasty innovations have made silk accessible to the emerging middle class. Feel the smooth texture that represents thousands of years of accumulated knowledge about domesticating silkworms, spinning thread, and weaving fabric. Walk through the marketplace, and you'll encounter something unprecedented in human history: a genuine cash economy based on standardized metal coins. The merchant selling you tea leaves accepts the same currency as the bookstore owner, the medical practitioner, and the government tax collector. It's the kind of monetary system that creates trust between strangers and enables commerce on a continental scale. But perhaps most remarkable is what you see in the evening, when families gather for dinner. Children as young as 6 are practicing calligraphy, not because their parents are scholars, but because basic literacy is becoming common among urban residents. The books they're reading were mass-produced using paper and printing techniques that won't reach Europe for centuries. This is what daily life looks like in the world's first modern society. You are a young man from a farming family in 100 BCE, and you're about to take the most important test of your life. Not a test of physical strength or military prowess. Those are for barbarians. This is an examination of your mind, your character, and your ability to serve the Han Empire as a scholar official. You're participating in what might be history's first attempt to create a true meritocracy. The examination hall smells like nervous sweat, ink, and the kind of intellectual intensity that comes from hundreds of young men competing for a handful of positions that could transform their lives forever. You can hear the scratch of brushes on paper, the occasional cough, and the soft footsteps of proctors, ensuring that no one cheats their way into government service. Your test consists of essays on classical texts, solutions to practical administrative problems, and demonstrations of your ability to compose poetry that shows both literary skill and moral character. It's not enough to memorize the Confucian classics. You have to show that you understand their deeper meanings and can apply their principles to real-world governance. This examination system represents something revolutionary. The idea that government positions should go to the most qualified candidates rather than to those with the best family connections or the largest armies. It's a concept so radical that most of the world won't adopt similar systems for nearly 2 millennia. But here's what makes the Han system truly innovative. It's not just about selecting officials. It's about creating a shared intellectual culture that unifies the empire. Every successful candidate has read the same books, absorbed the same values, and learned to think about problems in similar ways. The career path ahead of you is remarkable by ancient standards. Start as a local magistrate, prove your competence, and you might advance to higher positions based on performance rather than birth. The empire needs administrators who can manage irrigation projects, collect taxes fairly, maintain order without brutality, and represent imperial authority with both competence and dignity. What you're witnessing is the birth of something that won't be seen again until the modern era, a professional civil service based on education, examination, and merit. Welcome to one of the most bizarre episodes in Chinese history. It's the 1st century CE, and the Han Dynasty is about to get a serious reality check courtesy of a guy named Wang Mang. Think Bernie Sanders with unlimited political power and a disturbing willingness to use it. Wang Mang isn't your average politician. He comes from a noble family, but he's also a self-proclaimed reformer with radical ideas about wealth redistribution and an even bigger appetite for getting things done, whether people like it or not. Wang Mang's big idea? To create a new dynasty that abolishes private property, redistributes land, and generally turns the social order upside down. It's like he took a look at the Han Dynasty and thought, you know what this needs? A healthy dose of chaos and idealism. His first move is to seize all the land owned by the nobility and redistribute it to the peasants. Sounds great in theory, but in practice, it's a logistical nightmare. Who decides who gets what land? How do you prevent the newly minted landowners from just turning around and selling the land back to the highest bidder? Spoiler alert, it doesn't go smoothly. But Wang Mang forges ahead, convinced that he's on a divine mission to create utopia. He even changes the name of the dynasty to the Xian Dynasty, which means new, because apparently starting a revolution wasn't enough of a fresh start. But it's not just land reform. Wang Mang also takes a sledgehammer to the currency system, introducing new forms of money that are supposed to be more equitable. Again, sounds great, but in practice, it's a disaster. The new currency is so poorly received that it leads to rampant inflation and economic collapse. The Confucian scholars, who had been brought back into favor by the Han, are absolutely horrified by Wang Mang's radicalism. These are people who believe in gradual reform and moral persuasion, not revolutionary upheaval. Wang Mang's response? He doubles down. He issues edicts proclaiming the superiority of his new system and claims that the previous Han emperors were illegitimate and that he alone was chosen by heaven to lead. The combination of radical reforms, economic instability, and alienation of the scholarly elite creates a perfect storm of discontent. Rebellions start popping up all over the empire, and it's not long before Wang Mang finds himself facing a full-blown crisis. In a desperate bid to hold on to power, he resorts to increasingly brutal measures. The final blow comes when a group of disgruntled generals march on the capital. Wang Mang is deposed and killed, and the Han Dynasty is restored. Idealism is all well and good, but when it comes to governing an empire, practicality and adaptability are the name of the game. Wang Mang had some great ideas, but he was so focused on his vision of a socialist utopia that he completely ignored the realities of the world he was operating in. Welcome to the comeback story of the millennium. It's the 1st century CE, and after the chaos of Wang Mang's experiment, China is in desperate need of someone who understands both idealism and practical politics. Enter Liu, a man with royal blood, a pragmatic mind, and perfect timing. He's been hanging out in the countryside, watching Wang Mang's reforms create chaos and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Liu isn't just any claimant to the throne. He's a direct descendant of one of the most respected Han emperors, but instead of living the high life in the capital, he's been hanging out in the countryside, watching Wang Mang's reforms create chaos and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. That moment comes when Wang Mang's regime starts to crumble under the weight of its own incompetence. Rebellions are breaking out everywhere, and the central government is too weak to do anything about it. Liu sees his chance and takes it. He gathers a group of loyal followers and declares himself the rightful emperor of the Han Dynasty. It's a bold move, but given the state of the empire, it might just work. What follows is a masterclass in guerrilla warfare and political maneuvering. Liu and his followers launch a series of successful campaigns against Wang Mang's forces. But it's not just about military might. Liu also knows how to win hearts and minds. He promises land reforms that actually make sense, tax relief that won't bankrupt the government, and an end to the brutal repression that characterized Wang Mang's rule. It's a message that resonates with a populace tired of suffering and eager for competent leadership. The final showdown comes in 23 CE. Against all odds, Liu emerges victorious. Wang Mang is captured and executed, and Liu is proclaimed the new emperor of the Han Dynasty, marking the beginning of what historians call the Eastern Han period. But Liu doesn't just stop at restoring the Han Dynasty. He goes on to implement some of the most intelligent reforms in Chinese history. He reduces taxes, promotes trade and agriculture, and reinstates the examination system, ensuring that government officials are selected based on merit rather than family connections. Under Liu's rule, China enters a new golden age. The economy flourishes, culture thrives, and for the first time in decades, the Chinese people can look forward to a future filled with hope and opportunity. Liu's story is a powerful reminder that true leadership lies in finding the right balance between idealism and pragmatism. By learning from both the past and recent mistakes, Liu didn't just restore the Han Dynasty, he improved it. You're standing in a Han Dynasty workshop in 150 CE, and what you're witnessing would seem like magic to most people in the ancient world. The craftsman in front of you is creating something that won't be seen in Europe for another 1,000 years. Paper. Real paper, made from mulberry bark, hemp, and rags, processed through techniques that represent centuries of experimentation. Watch his hands as he works. The process looks simple, pulping plant fibers, spreading them on screens, pressing out water. But it represents one of the most important technological breakthroughs in human history. This paper will make books cheaper, learning more accessible, and administration more efficient than anything previously imagined. But paper is just the beginning. In the corner of the workshop, another craftsman is working with a magnetic compass, not for ocean navigation. That innovation is still centuries away, but for determining the most auspicious directions for building placement. The magnetic properties of lodestone have been understood by Chinese scientists for generations. The smell in the air tells another story of innovation. That's the scent of porcelain being fired in kilns that reach temperatures European craftsmen won't achieve for centuries. The chemical knowledge required to create true porcelain, understanding the right combinations of clay, the precise firing temperatures, the glazing techniques, represents a level of material science that makes Han Dynasty China a technological superpower. Step outside and look up at the night sky. Han astronomers are using mechanical devices to track celestial movements with a precision that allows them to predict eclipses, create accurate calendars, and develop mathematical models of planetary motion. Their observations are recorded on paper, calculated using decimal systems, and preserved in libraries that contain more accumulated knowledge than existed anywhere else in the ancient world. Touch the seismograph in the corner. Yes, seismograph. Han scientists have created mechanical devices that can detect earthquakes hundreds of miles away, allowing the government to send disaster relief to affected areas before news of the earthquake could possibly travel by conventional means. What you're witnessing isn't just technological innovation. It's the birth of systematic scientific thinking. Han scholars are asking questions about how the natural world works, testing their theories through experimentation, and recording their findings for future generations. Welcome to the golden twilight of the Eastern Han Dynasty, where prosperity and power are about to meet their greatest challenge yet. It's the 2nd century CE, and China is enjoying unprecedented peace and stability. The economy is booming, culture is flourishing, and the imperial court is filled with the sounds of celebration. But behind the scenes, all is not well. The very success of the Eastern Han Dynasty is sowing the seeds of its own destruction. As the saying goes, the higher you climb, the harder you fall, and the Han are about to take a big tumble. It all starts with a succession of weak emperors who are more interested in personal pleasures than in governing the empire. The once mighty Han bureaucracy becomes bloated and inefficient, filled with officials more concerned with their own wealth than with serving the people. Corruption is rampant, and the gap between rich and poor is growing wider by the day. While the elite class basks in luxury, common people are burdened with heavy taxes and inflation. It's a recipe for disaster. Rebellions begin to flare up across the empire, fueled by discontent and anger at the ruling class. The most significant is the Yellow Turban Rebellion, a massive peasant revolt that spreads like wildfire through the heartland of China. The rebels wear yellow headbands as their symbol, yellow being the color associated with earth and the common people in Chinese philosophy. Their leader, Zhang Ju, preaches a message of equality and divine justice that resonates with millions of suffering peasants. The Han response is swift and brutal. The imperial court, fearing for its survival, orders a crackdown on all dissent. This only serves to escalate the violence and push more people into the arms of the rebels. As the situation spirals out of control, the Han court becomes increasingly paranoid and repressive. The once great dynasty that had unified China and brought about an era of prosperity is now on the brink of collapse, consumed by the very forces of chaos it had fought so hard to prevent. You are standing in the ruins of Luoyang in 190 CE, and the smoke rising from what was once the Eastern Han capital tells a story that will echo through Chinese history for the next 4 centuries. The Great Library is burning, sending irreplaceable scrolls and books into the sky as ash. The Imperial Palace, once the symbol of unified Chinese power, has been looted by soldiers who care more about immediate profit than cosmic significance. The smell in the air is complex and tragic, burning paper mixing with the metallic scent of blood, the acrid smoke of destroyed porcelain, and underneath it all, the dusty smell of abandonment. This isn't just the end of a dynasty. It's the collapse of the entire system that has held China together for 4 centuries. Listen to the sounds around you. These aren't the organized footsteps of imperial armies or the purposeful bustle of government officials. These are the chaotic sounds of warlords and their private armies, each claiming to represent legitimate authority while actually serving only their own ambitions. The warlord Dong, who has just been assassinated by his own adopted son, but his death hasn't restored order. It's only created a power vacuum that dozens of other military leaders are trying to fill. Each controls a few provinces, maintains his own army, and issues his own proclamations. The unified China that seemed so permanent just decades ago has shattered into fragments that won't be reunited for generations. Touch the broken stone dragon that once adorned the palace entrance. Feel the craftsmanship that represented centuries of accumulated artistic skill, now lying in pieces because nobody cares about preserving symbols of imperial authority. This destruction isn't just about political change. It's about the breakdown of the cultural consensus that made Chinese civilization possible. But here's what makes this collapse truly tragic. The Han system worked. For 400 years, it created prosperity, stability, and cultural achievement on a scale that the ancient world had never seen. The problem wasn't with the system itself, but with the people who inherited it and failed to maintain the standards that made it effective. Walk through the abandoned government offices, and you'll see evidence of administrative sophistication that's being discarded, filing systems that tracked the empire's resources, communication networks that connected distant provinces, and legal codes that balanced central authority with local autonomy. All of it is being abandoned in favor of simpler, more brutal methods of control. The irony is palpable. The very military strength that the Han Dynasty created to protect Chinese civilization is now being used to destroy it. The regional armies that were supposed to defend against barbarian invasions are instead fighting each other for control of territory that becomes less valuable with each battle. As you stand among the ruins, you realize you're witnessing something that will become a recurring pattern in Chinese history: the collapse of unity followed by centuries of division, war, and gradual cultural decline. It will take nearly 400 years for another dynasty to restore the level of unity and prosperity that the Han created and that their successors have now destroyed. This is how empires die, not in a single catastrophic battle, but through the gradual abandonment of the principles and institutions that made them great in the first place. You're standing in a dusty courtyard in 220 CE, watching the last Han emperor hand over his seal to a warlord who promises to restore order. The irony is thick enough to cut with a sword. The dynasty that brought order from chaos is now dissolving back into the very fragmentation it once conquered. But as you brush the dust from your robes and smell the familiar scent of burning incense from a nearby shrine, you realize something profound. The Han Dynasty's greatest achievement wasn't any particular emperor or military victory. It was the creation of an idea so powerful that it would outlive every palace, every army, and every throne. You can smell it in the air around you, not just the incense, but something more subtle. It's the scent of continuity. That shrine where the incense burns? It's dedicated to Confucius, whose teachings the Han transformed from revolutionary philosophy into state orthodoxy. The children walking past you on their way to school will learn to write using characters standardized during the Han. The silk merchant hawking his wares is following trade routes first opened by Zhang Qian's impossible westward journey. Touch the walls of the buildings around you. Feel the bricks, made according to construction techniques perfected during the Han building boom. These aren't just ancient construction methods. They're the foundation of an architectural tradition that will define Chinese cities for the next 2 millennia. But here's what's truly remarkable. You're witnessing the birth of something that modern political scientists can barely comprehend. The Han didn't just create an empire. They invented the world's first successful meritocracy. Imagine if instead of being born into your job or buying your way into power or winning it through violence, you had to pass standardized tests based on moral philosophy and practical administration. It sounds almost impossible, but that's exactly what the Han civil service system achieved. Listen to the conversations around you. Merchants arguing about contracts, officials discussing grain distribution, scholars debating poetry. What you're hearing is the sound of a unified culture being born. Before the Han, China was just a geographic expression, a collection of kingdoms that happened to share some cultural similarities. But the Han created something unprecedented, a shared identity that transcended local loyalties. It's like the difference between Europe and the United States. Europe has dozens of countries with related cultures, but they've never been truly unified. The Han Dynasty did for China what the U.S. Constitution did for America, created a framework for unity that was stronger than regional differences. Except the Han system lasted 10 times longer and covered 3 times as many people. The really mind-blowing part is how the Han managed to combine seemingly contradictory elements into a stable system. They took the harsh efficiency of their legal system and wrapped it in the moral authority of Confucianism. They created an autocracy that governed through education rather than just force. They built a military machine capable of projecting power across continents while maintaining a civilian bureaucracy that prioritize scholarship over warfare. It's like creating a government that's simultaneously as efficient as Singapore, as culturally sophisticated as France, as militarily powerful as the United States, and as administratively complex as the European Union, except it actually worked for 4 centuries. As you stand in this crumbling courtyard, watching the end of an era, you can almost see the future stretching out ahead. The Han Dynasty will fall, but the Han system will endure. Future dynasties will rise and fall, but they'll all model themselves on Han precedents. Even foreign conquerors will adopt Han governance models wholesale. And it's not just China. The ripple effects of Han innovations will spread across the world. The paper they invented will revolutionize communication from Korea to Baghdad. The compass they developed will enable global navigation. The civil service system they created will eventually inspire government reform from Japan to Europe. You pick up a handful of dust from the courtyard floor. In your palm, you're holding the remains of the greatest political experiment in human history. But dust has a way of getting everywhere. This dust will blow across Asia, settle in libraries and schools and government buildings, and slowly teach the world that there are alternatives to ruling through pure force or inherited privilege. The Han Dynasty proved that you can create legitimacy through competence, unity through inclusion, and strength through adaptability. They showed that the most effective empires aren't built by the strongest armies or the most brilliant individual leaders, but by systems that can survive the death of any particular emperor or the loss of any particular war. As you brush the dust from your hands and prepare to leave this courtyard for the last time, you realize you've been present at one of history's great paradoxes. The Han Dynasty is ending, but in ending, it's about to become immortal. Because the idea of China, unified, educated, administratively sophisticated, and culturally confident, will outlive every throne and outlast every dynasty. Not bad for a story that started with Liu Bang, a middle-aged drunk from a backwater village who everyone underestimated. He couldn't have imagined that his desperate bid for survival would create a civilization that would still be influencing a quarter of the world's population over 2,000 years later. The Han Dynasty didn't just change China, it invented the very concept of what China could be. And that idea, tested by war, refined by prosperity, tempered by collapse, and proven by endurance, might just be the most successful political innovation in human history. As you walk away from the ruins of the Han capital, the dust swirling around your feet in the evening wind, you carry with you the knowledge that you've witnessed something unprecedented: the birth of the world's first modern state. It will take the rest of the world nearly 2 millennia to catch up.